I would like to start off this video with an excerpt from a poem by famous Vietnamese American poet Ocean Vuong. An American soldier fucked a Vietnamese farm girl. Thus my mother exists. Thus I exist. Thus no bombs, no family, no me. When having war as the elephant in the room, how do you grapple with the morals of the conflict? To be born out of violence, how do you justify your creation and your existence? How do you move on from the past in asking, what now? The question of victimhood in Vietnamese culture has been asked for generations. Those before us, our elders and first generations, never had the choice to ask, what now? When first landing in America, they immediately had to take agency and climb the rungs of the socio-economic ladder. There was no time to be victims or to fully recover from the traumas of the Vietnam War. There was no time for clear reflection and therapy for those who had to put food on the table for their families. The only option was to work without distraction to provide, to serve their families and the greater world at large. There was no such thing as an alternative future, a future where risk was in play, where discovery was encouraged. The only mindset was to be resilient and quiet, to be docile in order to slip through and provide a mere foundation for those ahead. The definition of success was one-sided and there was no other option. To be birthed from war and trauma without accessing its consequences, you start to see the poisons of the past start to trickle down all the generations. The emotional abuse faced in conflict carries onto themselves and the children after them. Although my family was lucky to have a complete family leaving Vietnam, many soldiers left Vietnam after starting their own families, leaving wives and children stranded in the broken motherland, forced to make their way out of the burden of living. To fight on is an understood yet silent pain for those at home, as servitude trumps selfishness in an unforgiving world. As Viet Thanh Nguyen once said, all wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield and the second time in memory. I think this passage from Ocean Vuong's book, it really expresses this idea. He talks about the experience of servitude in the nail salon. The most common English word spoken in the nail salon was sorry. It was the one refrain for what it meant to work in the service of beauty. Again and again, I watched as manicurists bowed over hand and foot of a client, some young as 7, say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, when they have done nothing wrong. I have seen workers, you included Ma, apologize dozens of times throughout a 45-minute manicure, hoping to gain warm traction that would lead to the ultimate goal, a tip, only to say sorry anyway when none was given. In the nail salon, sorry is a tool one uses to pander until the word itself becomes currency. It no longer merely apologizes, but insists, reminds, I'm here, right beneath you. It is the lowering of oneself so the client feels right, superior, and charitable. In the nail salon, one's definition of sorry is deranged into a new word entirely. One's that's charged and reused as both power and effacement as once. Being sorry pays. Being sorry even, or especially when one has no fault, is worth every self-deprecating syllable the mouth allows, because the mouth must feed. I think Ocean Vuong's example sort of illuminates a larger paradox when it comes to first and second generation immigrants. When first immigrating to America, many Vietnamese and other immigrant families were told by their elders to hide in the shadows, to be passive and to be quiet, to disappear. You may work hard silently, but don't stand up or fight any longer, and maybe you will find a way out and find your own living. This mindset heavily contrasts with later generation immigrants who want to be seen, to discover the world and push beyond their limits. This timidness falters into exploration for the second generation. And although there are clear-cut factors like time frame and mindset at play, these positions are honorable and tell a more complete story of the Vietnamese and the wider immigrant story of America. I think this paradox sort of plays into the Western misconception of the importance of spoken word, that in order to fully solve and resolve something, you have to talk them out. To Vietnamese and other immigrants around the world, their immense pain and trauma is silently understood by those around them. Their suffering is beyond words, and their daily lives of servitude to provide for their family and for others that they care about automatically overrule the Western definition of self, the selfish self. However, although taking it out might not always be an option, to hear the words "I love you" and "I'm proud of you" is often far and few between. The act of service speaks louder than all in Vietnamese American households and many other immigrant households. To truly live in the present, they say that they are still of use to you. The question of "Are you hungry?" or "What can I clean?" can be viewed not only as their form of servitude, but like a sage-like understanding of their trauma is beyond them. They cannot change the past and live in their victimhood. They never asked to leave Vietnam or the war to destroy their hometown and tear apart their livelihoods and their family. But to truly stay in the present, they ask about what they can do now to help others in their family and the greater world around them. To view their servitude only as a means to an end disregards a sense of control that comes from the act of servitude. That beyond the past, they will find the resilience within themselves to carry on and care for those they still have close. This instills a sense of self-worth in an unforgiving new world, a sense of control outside of Western ideals and exploration of the self. Success to them is to prosper with what you have and to squeeze playable cards until there's nothing left to gather. A really good example of this is seen in food and cooking. Many immigrants focus on providing their home-cooked meals, preserving family recipes. They feel like the kitchen is the one place that you can use their intuition in this unforgiving world. They are able to gather a sense of control by serving others, by serving their family, and just to use their act of servitude as a means to an end is disregarding that small gain of control in a world that's so foreign and so different for those who just came here. Although this is the older perspective, the second generation has this sense of discovery that's commonly found. These immigrants may come from a sense of longing and acceptance from their two separate identities. With the option of choice, the ideals of Eastern and Western culture clash, decentralizing a sense of belonging in self. The cultural differences of one's family's identity of success versus the Western ideals of self-prosperous, selfish success can lead future generations to feel stuck in time, burdened and obligated to fulfill a compromise between both identities. We see this as not only upholding the culture by elders living with their children when they grow up, but many other ways that immigrants have to deal with these two separate worlds entirely. This leads to the question of self-determination. Can you truly be an individual if you are in servitude of multiple forces and idealistic ties? Are you really yourself when you're molded not by your own individual thought, but by the society that dictates the decisions you make that's around you? I think a really good example of this would be seen in art, as Ocean Vuong stated in an interview. When we think of stereotypes of the Asian artist, what do we think of? We think of the prodigal violinist, or the pianist, or the formation of a young child musician modeled by tiger parents, a strict regimented practice in order to play in service of the greats before them, the Eurocentric greats like Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven. To think of these children as anything else but servants of the Eurocentric musical repertoire is bizarre, and it leads to personal questioning. Where did a unique talent or vision come from? This same question can be seen in the academic scholar, forced into programs like Kumon, participating in decathlons, in debate competitions. All of these ideas of what success means for Asian immigrants seems to come from the same place of regimen and rigor. And when deviating from that mold, that stereotype, that idea of self-autonomy is questioned. Ocean Vuong mentions in this interview when he used to write a poem in his early age, and his teacher questioned if he plagiarized it. If it's not following the same regimented formula as a virtuoso or an academic scholar, it is automatically questioned by society why this young Asian American is able to make and move outside of the box. This is also bringing up the topic of self-autonomy. You are dictated by the ideals and the expectations of both Eastern and Western stereotypes and ideals. To be anything else but of service, or to come from that tiger parent mold, as Ocean says, you are inconceivable. Now, this begs the question, how do we bridge this generational gap? How can we talk or deal or mend trauma with both generations understanding the point? And besides just a greater understanding of Western and Eastern ideals or the generational gap, I think it's important to recognize the autonomy in making a compromise. Being able to pick different sides of Western and Eastern ideals and form a mutual bond that can be expressed through both sides. Although this might be seen as servitude towards each or other ideals or stereotypes, I feel like it's powerful in of itself to try to find a conclusion within these two different worlds. And although trauma and stereotypes flood generations of war-born Vietnamese immigrants, resilience and growth from the past can lead to a profound sense of discovery and identity. Those that can be lost can be found once more. One way that Vietnamese Americans are able to bridge this gap is through the topic of health. The idea of maintaining good health or endurance within the Vietnamese household is extremely common. An excerpt from an essay states that when we would encounter a struggle or an obstacle, I would be reminded to try your best to endure, with the implication that our situation would soon be better. The latter phrase often came accompanied with an imposition of nonchalance, that our family had already endured the worst, that things can only get better from here. The former an afterthought followed by a flurry of other reminders, including try your best to learn and do well in school. The importance of health is often seemingly one-sided, as elders tend to sacrifice their own health for the sake of their families and their livelihoods. Another excerpt explains this one-sidedness perfectly. When I was younger, it seemed normal because they always told me we should always have emergency things ready just in case. When my mom had cancer, she had 2 tumors, one in her brain and one in her stomach. I think that was really difficult because I know part of it, she was like, oh, I don't want to leave my family. But I think she was also thinking about what's going to happen to the family dental office. Who's going to clean the house? Those kinds of things, which I found really interesting but kind of annoying at the same time, because I would want to tell her, oh my God, take care of yourself first. This conflicting view on health is incredibly frustrating in its incredible irony, but it's an important step in understanding how second-generation Vietnamese Americans recognize and the behavioral patterns and trauma that their parents carry. This understanding of the nexus of health that connects the 2 generations forms the bridge of understanding, a way to reconfigure their relationships and filial duty to not only their parents, but to Vietnamese traditional customs and traditions, steeped in patriarchy and laden with the influences of both French colonialism and American imperialism. This idea of health and family gives a line of communication for both generations, a focus on the individual as the second generation prospering in a greater Western society, and the family, a strong force of older generations to look after and to take care of. The crux of health, as seen in many Vietnamese and other Asian Americans taking care of their parents and their parents long after in adulthood, creates spaces for communication revolving around difficult and often awkward topics. As I quote, health within the Vietnamese American community is not only referential to one's own individual health, but the health of the family and community in a collective sense of resiliency. I think in addition to the second generation's motivation to reconstruct their Vietnamese identity, it's deeply rooted in a loose nostalgia of the homeland, a mourning of an ambiguous lost country seen in Vietnamese flags along the stars and stripes within many little Saigons around the country. Our homeland is founded in folktales and trauma, a mired, uncertain mix that doesn't see past the refugee story. Many first generations implore their children to call themselves not Vietnamese, but Vietnamese Americans. This reaffirmation of identity bounded by stories of the war and immigration leaves holes in understanding one's diaspora and upbringing. How can you truly be Vietnamese if you haven't fully visited or understood your homeland beyond being a product of conflict and war? The creation of a post-memory, a way to reconstruct one's identity through past, present, and future, is a powerful medium that forms what it means to be a Vietnamese American. To both acknowledge the inherited trauma of war and a shared resilience that transcends generations creates the foundation of understanding between both sides. Although phrases such as "I love you" and "I'm proud of you" are rarely spoken in Vietnamese households, there is a mutual understanding of resilience between both sides in the forms of service and respect. From folk stories to unspoken understandings of the war and struggles, starting all over again by retaining conversational bits of Vietnamese, to eating in Little Saigon, to visiting night markets and maintaining family recipes, by reviewing old photo books and singing old songs. Even though second generations may have never visited Vietnam or the homeland, there is a sense of connection, respect, and trust beyond the war, that we are more than the war, that we are ourselves Vietnamese. Many unspoken truths and understandings determine what it means to be a Vietnamese American. To respect both views of success without the need of a Western approach, this shapes how we can understand ourselves as resilient and as Vietnamese Americans more than the product of a war. To fully dismantle the master's house, we must understand both sides being heard, both vocally and silently understood. We must look inwards towards our families and trust their good intentions and realize their situational upbringings. We must look past Western conventions of success as the only option while acknowledging our elders' perspectives of serving beyond the self. Both sides, both generations, both perspectives are voices that demand respect and attention, ones that promote a strong sense of individuality and control in answering the question, what now, even if the understanding is unspoken. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. This was more of a think piece that I did. I kind of reorganized an essay that I wrote and did more research and used anecdotes from some of my favorite poets and authors. So yeah, if you guys have any thoughts or questions, feel free to leave them. If you resonate with this, I appreciate it. And yeah, let me know if there's any other things that you would like me to go over. Thank you.